Reddit can be a terrifying place if you know where to look, with places like r/nosleep housing some of the scariest stories to grace the internet. So today on Top 5 Scary Videos, we're going to be counting down our list of the top 5 scary stories found on Reddit. And guys, this is a long one, so let's just jump in. Oh, but before we do, stick around until the end of the video because there will be comments. Okay, now let's jump in. Coming in at 5, the Tinder date. Uploaded to r/nosleep by Small Dog on Desk, great name. They explain their strange Tinder date that may have led to a stalking. I quote, "I think my Tinder date is stalking me. I swear. I don't know what to do because I can't prove it. I can smell him in my home. The putrid stench of grease and third world sewers, mixed with body odor. My apartment has absolutely reeked for days. I haven't gone in except to pick up clean clothes and drop off old ones. I first noticed the smell when I came back from our date, alone. The smell was faint, barely there. For a moment I thought it was my asthma of garbage coming from the open bathroom window. When I closed it, the city scum stuck to my skin. Like the rest of my life, the date had gone just wrong. Gerald, he was strange, he looked like his pictures except that Gerald was greasy. No, he was certifiably oily. His hair looked like it was smeared with a slick, almost dripping pomade, and his skin had a suspicious rainbow sheen, like oil on water. His voice matched the rest of him, sleazy, oozing, cystic. I was instantly turned off. Embarrassingly, I was on Tinder because I had no friends. I can see why, judge much. I had just moved to a middle-sized industrial city in Southeast Asia for my company's 6-month overseas industrial attachment. My colleagues were all middle-aged, and I was absolutely craving for some under 30 interaction. I swiped right on Gerald about 2 weeks ago. An empty profile but lots of pictures. He seemed normal enough, cute in the tall, lean sort of way. That said, I won't deny that the idea of having a local boy take me around made the idea of 6 months in the middle of basically an industrial nowhere somewhat palatable. When Gerald stood up, he left a slick gloss on the seat. I dropped half of my bill, mumbled something about work, and ran off into the cab that had been waiting for me. I tipped him an extra 20 to wait. I don't remember what was talked about during our date. I do remember seeing him through the window of the restaurant. His eyes were slimy, roving, watching me leave. He texted me in the cab asking for another date. I politely declined, but his replies not so congenial. The smell. It was the smell that made me decide to leave. It was still faint then, just a lingering scent, but it made me nervous, a primal uncomfortable feeling of something that was not quite right. I threw some clothes into my gym duffel, then called a cab to the closest Holiday Inn. That was about half a week ago. The texts had been coming in once every few hours. I ignored them now. Last night I went to my apartment to get more clothes. The smell soaked the front door, spilling into the corridor. I smelled it the moment my lift opened. It grew stronger as I approached the apartment. My doorknob gleamed. It was polished, rubbed raw by scrabbling hands. I didn't need to touch it to know that it would be oily, that it would be putrid. I rushed back to the safety of the hotel, the safety of other people. I sat in the lobby for hours, basking in the fading chatter of tourists, the glow of the ceiling lamps, breathing, just breathing. The desk staff looked at me oddly, but no one said anything. My legs tingled when I stood up. I was exhausted. I staggered. Lobby, lift, corridor, bedroom, bed. I was just sinking into the mattress when I noticed it. The smell of faint, rotting oil. I rubbed the fingers of my right hand together. When did they get covered in grease? Whew. Okay, I'll say that the scariest part of this story initially was the girl's judgment. She tore in and she tore hard. Respect. However, the ending definitely gave me chills. Coming in at 4, the man in the apartment. Posted to r/nosleep by Reality Subsides, they said, I quote, "There's a tiny man living in my apartment. He roams around when I'm there, moving from place to place, but I can never actually look at him. I'll see him out of the corner of my eye, sitting on a counter, kneeling on the floor, always looking at me, but as soon as my eyes dart in his direction, turns out it was just a lamp or a shoe or a cup. He's just always in my peripheral vision. I didn't see him often when I first moved in. I'd occasionally notice a strange shape in the corner, but after looking over would always pass it off as my imagination. It's my leaning backpack. It's just the garbage can. I'd tell myself that I was just tired or hungry or drunk. I never really thought about it, then I began to see him more and more often. He began to take shape, to be immediately recognizable. What used to be a vague black shape became something with color, definition, depth. What I used to be able to shrug off as nothing became something real, something ominous. He began to have a presence. I'd still look over, always with the same result, always trying to convince myself I was just seeing things. Eventually I couldn't ignore it anymore. There was something there, it wasn't my mind. He used to startle me, now he terrifies me. The innocent, silly realization of, oh, I thought that stack of newspapers was a person is gone. Now he's grown an anonymous presence replaced with a heavy feeling of dread. I've started to see him always. He never leaves, he's always sitting there in the shadows in my peripheral vision watching me. Sometimes I'll try to ignore him for long stretches of time. I won't look over at him. I won't acknowledge him. I'll just pretend I don't see him sitting over there, staring at me. I'll just go on about my business. This is when he began screaming. The first time it happened, I was sitting on my couch watching TV. I could see him in the corner, standing there, staring at me, but I tried to ignore him. I tried to drown him out with the television, turning it up louder and louder so it would capture my attention and make me forget about him. I'd still see he was there, but he'd stay in my periphery. I refused to look at him. I remember watching the show, his presence momentarily forgotten, when suddenly he was right next to me, like he instantaneously leapt forward. He was right next to me. I could feel him staring at me. He screamed, the loudest thing I've ever heard, deafening and mind-consuming. I jumped and reflexively looked over, but it was just my jacket draped on the armrest of the couch, vaguely resembling the shape of a person. Heart pounding, I tried to return to the TV, but I could still see him there, standing in the corner, watching me. Well, this is absolutely terrifying. Tiny man in an apartment. Do you believe it, or is it all in his mind? Coming in at 3, the murder trial. Uploaded to Reddit by Bottle Wash. To r/AskReddit, they responded to the question, what's the scariest story you know that is 100% true? They said, I quote, this is an incident that happened to me about 10 years ago. I live in Melbourne, Australia. I was driving home from work one night around 9 PM midweek, so the roads were quiet. As I was driving downhill, I heard a sound that was like a jet engine roaring behind me. The next thing I knew, a car goes flying past me going twice the speed limit. It looked like a fairly old crappy car. Car started to get the speed wobbles, and then one of the tires came flying off and rolled at speeds downhill, whilst the car spun out and crashed. I stopped my car to make sure whoever was inside was okay. A guy got out of the car and looked over at me, then started moving extremely quickly towards me. I don't know why, but I hit my eternal locks on the car, which was fortunate because no more than 2 seconds later the guy started grabbing at the driver's side door and smashing on my windscreen, with his fists trying to get in. I'll never forget the crazy look he had in his eyes. I put my foot down on the accelerator and drove off back home. Now you may think the story is scary enough as is, well it gets worse. Let's continue. They go on to say, I decided to swap cars once I got home and drove back to see what was going on. I saw 2 fire trucks and about 4 police close to where the incident happened. When I got back to the crash site, the guy was no longer there, so I decided to head home. The next day at work, I was online bored reading the news when I found an article that shocked me. The article was about a guy who had been in a police chase for 1 hour and the police stopped chasing him because it was becoming too dangerous. Turns out the guy was high on meth, had stolen a car an hour drive away, and had been in a hot pursuit since. After crashing the car, the guy apparently crossed to the other side of the road and hailed the first car that appeared, which was a taxi. He got into the taxi and stole it. In the process, he pushed the driver out of the driver's side door and the driver got stuck and dragged at speeds. The driver died from the incident. I called the police and had a detective assigned to me. He fingerprint checked my car and got a statement. I had to testify in the Supreme Court as a key witness in a murder trial. The guy got 30 years and they told me that my testimony was one of the main factors in convicting him. Whoa, how terrifying is that? Remember, always lock your doors, you never know who you might come across down a quiet road. Coming in at 2, Grandma's light is always on. Uploaded to r/nosleep by Saint Entropy, they said, I quote, in one corner of my grandma's living room stood a lamp that was always never turned off. She would change the bulb every week like clockwork, waiting until the afternoon sunlight poured through the windows and filled the room. Even then she hurried, holding her breath until the deed was done and the lamp was back on. I would ask her about it once in a while. Each time she would smile softly, tussle my hair and probably change the subject. I didn't learn the truth until I was 13, the first time I turned off the lamp. I just wanted to see what would happen. Grandma screamed when she walked into the darkened living room, a plate of cookies falling from her hands and crashing to the floor. I could hear her praying under her breath as she raced to turn the light back on. Tears were shining in her eyes when she turned to me, her lips pressed thin. Without warning, she slapped me hard across the face. She gathered me up in her arms and begged for forgiveness. She then finally told me about the lamp. It was a ghost light, she said. Ever since she and my grandpa had bought the house back when they first arrived in America, the spirits of the dead had plagued her. She ended up asking grandpa for help. It was he who had first lit the ghost light, and as long as that beacon burned through the darkness, she had never seen another spirit. Something woke me later that night. I lay in bed listening to the darkness until I heard scratching coming from the living room. Rats were the last thing I wanted to deal with at the moment. I rolled over with a groan, determined to ignore it until the morning. The scratching continued, constantly jerking me from the edge of sleep. I threw the blankets off and stormed out into the hall. I didn't bother turning on the lights as I made my way to the living room. I knew every inch of the house and I moved confidently through it. I was furious at having been woken and my anger was ill-prepared for what I found. An elderly woman was crouched in the corner, her gaunt back to me. She was scratching at the floor floor where the walls met, stopping every few minutes to cock her head. I had no idea how this woman had gotten into my house, and though it was obvious she needed help, my hand shook as I reached out to gently squeeze her shoulder. I meant to ask where she lived, who her caretaker was, but the words were driven from my mind when she turned and I saw her face. Her eyes were solid black, bottomless pits that didn't reflect the moonlight. Her jaw hung impossibly open, unhinged, and the dark tunnel of her mouth spiraled down into her throat. I had a moment to realize who she was, to recognize the familiar map of wrinkles in her face, the curls of her wispy hair. Then my grandma screamed, I shrieked, stumbling backwards away from the nightmare in the corner. My arms flailed in the air, reaching for the nearest lamp, and my hands touched the ghost light. I yanked the chain, filling the room with light, and she was gone. I never turned off the ghost light after that. After letting the bulb burn out one evening, I began changing it every week just as grandma had. Eventually I got married, and luckily for me, my wife was tolerant of my strange fixation on the lamp. The light continued to burn, and I lived my life happily enough. Whew, this one truly shook me. There's something about the supernatural that I just don't want to mess with. Keep those lamps turned on, folks. And finally, in at number 1, kidnapping. Posted to r/nosleep by Nix2307, they describe how 7 years ago when they were 12-13, something awful happened to them. I quote, I was walking home from school. It was mid-June. I'd just parted ways with my friend, and I had 15 minutes to walk by myself before I got home. I noticed while I was walking with my friend that I kept seeing the same red van along our journey. Now, we usually go a longer way so we can walk with all our friends, but this red van just kept popping up. Now, I didn't think much of it, I just thought they were different vans, but after a few times I decided to memorize the number plate. After my mum had told me to do so if I ever felt like I was in danger, or if something just didn't feel right. I parted ways with my friend and started on my journey home. I decided to take a route that's a little longer than the one I usually take just because I didn't feel comfortable walking through the park by myself, and I just had a bad feeling through the whole walk home like something bad was going to happen. I was only a few streets away from my home when the red van started to just crawl behind me. This man looked in his late 30s, early 40s, popped his head out and started to try and get my attention, and started catcalling me. I remember looking at him and just telling him that I'm not interested and to leave me alone, but that just angered him. He started screaming at me, telling me to get in the van. I'll forever remember his teeth, those disgusting yellow rotting teeth. They were like something from an anti-smoking advert to scare people into quitting. I told him that I would call the police if he didn't leave me alone. He proceeded to laugh in my face. He sped off a little forwards and parked the van, and he was waiting for me to walk past. I crossed the road and started running, trying to lose the man. Just when I thought I lost him, there he was, pulling up next to me. The sliding doors on the side of the car opened, and there was another man there trying to grab me and pull me in. I screamed like there was no tomorrow. The man managed to grab my shoulder, and I just bit him until I could taste blood. The man let go of me and I ran for my life. I jumped in the bush and hid. I waited until I didn't see the van for at least 30 minutes before I ran home. As soon as I got in, my parents started questioning me. I broke down crying and told them everything. They called the police and I gave them my statement, but nothing ever came of it. I refused to walk home until I turned 16. This is absolutely terrifying. There is nothing more horrible than a child getting abducted. Thank God she reacted the way she did. Stay safe out there, kids. Well, there we have it. Did these Reddit stories scare you? Are there any that we missed? Leave us all your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below, and perhaps we can do a part 2. Before I go though, I just want to respond to a few comments from one of our last videos. Top 5 scariest monsters from TV shows. Jay Small said, I don't want to be that person, but it's called Candle Cove. Okay. There was a typo in my script and I called Candle Cove Candle Cover. Forgive me, the world will not end. Not yet anyway. There's still time. Tiffany Benfield said, I loved watching Tales from the Crypt. I watched it on HBO. Lucy, you're the best evil queen ever. Keep up the phenomenal job. Thank you so much. I was very late to Tales from the Crypt. I had to watch it for my film major at university, and it was the best discovery I've ever made. Tom Humphrey said, there is something very mysterious but equally attractive about Lucy. The main reason I watched these top 5 lists, if I'm honest. Well, shucks. Thanks for the love. Michael Cooley said, Miss Lucy, this has to be your best video yet. Your charm and lighter side really shone through. You seem to be happier than usual and it was a pleasure to watch. As for the content, great as always. I think we need a part 2. Don't know how you feel about Stranger Things, but damn, the CGI in the new season is amazing. The Mind Flayer looked great. Also, I think the smoke monster from Lost had its moments. Keep up the great work. Cheers. Ooh, thank you. I'm glad I appear happier than usual. It's all a lie. I'm impartial about Stranger Things. Season 1 was good, 2 not great, and 3 I have yet to watch, but maybe I'll give it a go. Also, bonus points for mentioning Lost is by far one of my favorite shows of all time. Don't fight me on that. And on that controversial note, if you haven't already, be sure to give this video a big thumbs up, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another scary vid. And until next time, see you later.